About time.
Why don't you go first?
So actually, let's start with something you usually do. Who here is a returning face? Because I think I recognize a few people.
Nice.
Awesome. Welcome back. It's been a while. Sorry we weren't here last year. We were vending last year and we had like none of our support staff to come and help us, so we just stuck to the vendor's room last year. But it is a pleasure to be back, and welcome back.
So for those of you who don't know, I'm Brett Pierce. My pen name is B.H. Pierce. I've written a fantasy novella trilogy and a full-length flintlock fantasy novel inspired by the many, many French revolutions.
And I'm Andrew Kane, and I've got out a urban fantasy series. I've got 2 books into it so far, with more to come.
So, welcome to How to Finish a Story. We won't be delving very deeply into the minutiae of writing in this panel. What we'll be covering are the very broad strokes that can apply to any kind of story in any kind of setting, in any kind of genre or medium. First, we'll be discussing how to figure out and refine your writing process. Then we'll move on to the overall structure of a story and how to make quality characters. There should be plenty of times for questions afterwards, so I'll ask everyone to hold your questions to the end. So there are 3 rules to writing a story. You're all different, you're all individuals, and you've all got to work it out for yourselves. Thank you.
All right, on a more serious note, writing is, in fact, a very personal pursuit. And it's a lot of long hours staring at a blank page, trying to make something where there was nothing. Each writer has their own method and their own process for getting their ideas out of their head and onto the page. We're going to talk a lot about the planner and pantser side of things. A planner being someone who plots out all of their novels to the nth degree, who does what down to every scene. And a pantser being someone who decides, hey, let's do this, with no real plan whatsoever.
Yeah,
but that's fine too. They're both valid processes. Neither one is inherently better than the other. And I find, like most things, that there is value in trying to learn from all styles. There are things a pantser is going to do better than a planner, and there are things that a planner is going to do better than a pantser. And if you can pluck what works from each one of them, you're going to be a lot happier for it. I kind of went off script, my apologies.
Yeah, just a little bit. So in general, there are 3 stages to writing that are universal no matter what your process is. Pondering, word vomit, and editing. Pondering is what I like to call the fun part. This is the stage where you come up with your ideas and start to put the story together in your head. This is an incredibly piecemeal process. Sometimes you'll think of a great ending, and your pondering will focus on how to get there. Sometimes you'll think of a great beginning, and your pondering will focus on where to go from there. Let's see, maybe you'll think of a great scene, or a building, or a weapon, or a fight. And your pondering will be all about how to build your tale around that. As you go on, a hopefully coherent narrative will start to appear out of your shower thoughts and daydreams. The most important thing at this stage is to write things down. It's easy to forget fun ideas when you have a lot of things on your mind, as we all do now. And your notes will serve you well in the next stage. The word vomit, which is the desperate sprint to get ideas onto the page. Part of the reason it's called word vomit is because it is sloppy and terrible, and the very act feels like expelling ideas. This stage of the process cares very little for quality, and is focused on getting the bulk of your story onto the page. You have to remind yourself at this stage to just keep swimming. A book is made in the editing. If you try and wait for the words to be perfect, you will not ever get it completed. Perfection is the enemy of finished. You can edit a bad page, but not a blank page.
All right, on to editing. This for me is one of the most difficult parts, as you have to tango with your ego and the words on the page to make it better. And there's nothing quite like admitting that you've already made a mistake. It's crucial, however. This is the part where a story becomes worthy of being a finished product, like a book. It requires a lot of practice, and you need to learn how to take a critical view of your own work. It's likely that you will need to do multiple rounds of editing. You're not really done editing until you feel like you'd rather die than do it again. With that said, how many and what types of edits you need to do will depend on your particular talents. We'll be going into more of the styles of edits in a minute. All right. In general, some of the edits that we're fond of using can be broken down into these rough categories. Grammar edits, copy edits, story edits, description edits, and out loud edits, as well as what the heck was I thinking edits.
Yeah, those are the fun ones.
A story edit is an edit where you go through and make sure that everything makes sense. This one is particularly important to those of you who are writing more as a pantser. You will sometimes find that you just have some really silly logical inconsistencies. One time I wrote that people ordered Chinese and they received pizza. You know, it happens, but you gotta fix it. Which is a good example of adding something which you didn't intend to put in there. And as you're doing these, you can edit those out. Story edits are best done before going into other styles of edits. The earlier you can do them, the better. You want it to catch all of those silly little things as early as possible, because then the grammar and whatnot is easier to correct afterwards.
The longer you take writing your story, the more you're going to need story edits. I'm going in on 2 years writing this one story now, and every now and then I go and read the early chapters to make sure I'm not contradicting myself. All right, so the what was I thinking edits. These ones are reserved for finding things that are just dumb to the point of funny or seriously out of place. For a good example, Andrew once forgot the word faucet while he was word vomiting and had missed it in 2 other edits. Because what he wrote in his place was grammatically correct, however, is not something a human being would say. Instead of the word faucet, he wrote water system, which it is a system designed to release water, but that is not actually what we call it. This one is...
I can't describe the amount of deep shame I felt when I finally realized that the word I was looking for was faucet. The fact that it went through 2 edits without finally showing up to my eyes is proof that you need to read out loud to yourself.
Description edits are an edit that I have developed specifically for me, because one thing I've discovered about my writing process is that I cannot describe anything to save my life. And in my process, momentum is very important. So when I'm writing through and a new character shows up, I was like, and then Ben came into a describe. And then I'll move on. And it'll be like 20,000 words later that I'll finally go back and go like, all right, what does Ben look like? He's tall. Is that going to be enough?
No. You need at least 3. Rule of 3.
Rule of 3, yeah. So that is an example of making your process work for you. Figuring out what works and what does not.
Another thing that we're going to talk a little about is overwriting and underwriting. Just like with the planner and pantser scale, there is no right or wrong in this. You just are what you are, and you're going to have to do different things to compensate. Overwriting just means that you're going to have to edit down a lot more. Underwriting just means you're going to have to take the time to do a description edit to make sure that you've punched it up enough. There is no right or wrong with that.
I was writing for years before I knew that was a thing, and every bit of editing advice I ever came across was like, you're going to have to cut out 1/3 of your story. But like, my story is 30,000 words long. I wanted it to be 60,000 words long. And then I eventually found out, hey, underwriting's a thing, which was helpful to my sanity.
All right. I think we're talking about out loud edits now.
Oh yes, the most important.
If you want to make sure that your book reads the way you want it to, read it out loud. You will catch dozens of mistakes your eyes might just have glanced over. You wrote it, and you know how it should sound, not how it actually sounds. But reading it out loud forces you to go slower, forces you to see what is on the page versus what you intended to be on the page. Okay. Moving on. Each writer has their own process, which is both inherent and developed. What I mean by this is that there are some things you will do naturally well as a writer. Some things will just come easy. On the flip side, there are aspects of the process that will be hard for you, and you will need to adapt to create strategies to address those weaknesses. For the sake of comparison, I'll tell you about my strategy and Brett's strategy. Do you want to go first? Or?
Yeah, I'll go first.
Okay.
Let's see. So my process could be called pondering heavy. I start with a few disparate ideas that kind of be on my commute to work or in the shower. These can be ideas for scenes, for characters, religious rituals, fights, anything and everything. With these ideas in mind, I start to figure out what the book is going to be about. And then when I know what the book is about, I break it down into arcs. And then I break those arcs down into chapters. And I break those chapters down into scenes. Then I think about it for a couple weeks, and then on a day off, I take an Adderall and write for 10 hours.
If you hadn't guessed, Brett is a planner.
Yep. Let's see, between getting food and getting distracted, I can churn about 6,000 words out on a good day. Now, since I can only word vomit on days that I have off, that means I can do that once, maybe twice a week, depending on the time of year. On other days, I start editing, fixing upwards lines, adding descriptions, cutting, pasting, and all that. When I finish a chapter, I send it off to a friend of mine. He tells me what I did wrong, and I fix it, and then I keep going. In my process, I will be editing and word vomiting at the same time. When I was writing the second book of the Atelva Chronicles, I had the first half of the book completely finished. The second half was being edited. The third quarter was being edited, and the last bit of it still hadn't been written yet. I'm usually in all kinds of different places as I'm going through a book. Let's see. I lurch along and eventually I come to the end, send it off to the copy editor to make sure all the grammar's right, and then it's done.
It's that simple.
I, on the other hand, am a lot closer to a pantser. I started as a pantser. With that said, I have slowly been learning how to do this planning thing a little bit better every year. But I view my process more like going on a road trip. I know where I want this to end. And I got a rough idea of how I'm going to get there. But you better bet we're taking detours, and if I see something that I want to stop at, we're stopping there and adding it in. And because of that, things can get a little messy. I usually just have like one idea per chapter that I want to be the focus, and after I go off track, because you always go off track when you're a pantser, even with the best laid track, you just look at it to kind of guide yourself back to where you want it to be. It's not always perfect, but one thing I've been doing at the end of my process now is actually going through and creating a reverse outline. I've been reading the document and then writing down what actually happened, and then comparing that outline to my original outline, and seeing if there are any major discrepancies or anything that messes with it. So that's pretty different than planning out down to the scene. And guess what? There are 2 books sitting here right now. Both ways will get you there.
And I think we said this, but it bears repeating, there's no right way of doing this. I have a friend of mine who does quite well doing a lit RPG isekai that he publishes serially, and every week he writes a new chapter. And then the next week he had no idea where he was going when he started out, and he just kind of went. And I couldn't do that to save my life. And I'm incredibly jealous of him because it sounds a hell of a lot less stressful than the way I write. And he's jealous of me because it sounds like actually having a plan would make things a lot easier for him. But they're just the ways we get things out. And if you don't know your process yet, experiment. Try something new. Maybe go somewhere else, play different music. Try a bit of planning, a bit of pantsing. Once you do know what your process is, keep experimenting. Try something new. Tweak. When you're first starting out, focus on refining your own process before you really try to get down to it.
Okay. All right, now to go over some really basic elements of the craft. Story structure. This is like 101 level creative writing class stuff here. Here we go. Specifically, we're going to be talking about stuff like the beginning, middle, and end. I know this seems very obvious, but we're currently at an anime convention, and we all know One Piece is still going, so this is a thing we need to talk about.
Naruto!
Sasuke!
How long
Oh, no,
is
Haru,
One Piece?
wait,
I don't
what?
know. It's hit 1,000 episodes.
So with that said,
Okay. And almost 1,010 chapters, or 1,098.
Okay.
I mean, kudos to
I don't
them.
know what it is.
For the love of God, the treasure was the friends you made along the way. Just let the manga end.
This is the one benefit of it being a Thursday. We can be a little unprofessional at times. So back to it real quick. Beginning, middle, and end. So let's start with the beginning. That was yours.
Alright. Let's see. This beginning, the setup is the introduction to your world, your characters, and your conflict. If you think of a novel as thirds, then this third is all about establishing what's going on. This can be particularly challenging if you're writing fantasy or sci-fi, as in addition to introducing characters, you have to introduce your world as well. What you want to do with this is identify the most important things your readers need to know about your characters, world, and story. There are several different schools of thought on the best way to start a story. I'm of the opinion that the best way to start a story is with a situation the reader can easily grasp. For example, my story Fire and Pearls starts with a ship on fire. People know what a ship is. They know that it being on fire is probably bad. And then I can go from there. An immediate and relatable situation will also help introduce your characters, as it will show how they react. It is important to show your characters doing rather than just existing. They should be dynamic rather than static, a person rather than a shape. The end of your beginning often ends on a high conflict note, which sneaks into the middle, also referred to as the rising action. This is where your conflict will continue to rise until we approach the climax. In the beginning, you introduce everything. Now it's time to throw complications and challenging to all those things. The middle is slightly more nebulous. What happens is dictated heavily by genre you're writing. The middle, in a crime series, this is where the main suspect turns up dead, or new evidence exonerates them. In a romance novel, this is where the main love interest's sordid past comes to light. In Star Wars, spoiler alert, this is where we find out that Darth Vader is Luke's father.
Oh my god.
Sorry for everyone who just watched Kenobi. The middle is where the elements continue to be introduced and called back to as the story builds towards the ending.
All right, the ending is composed of two major pieces. The climax, which is supposed to be the definitive highest moment in the story, and the falling action, which aims to tie everything up. A few particular genres do play around with the idea of a false climax. Horror in particular is renowned for this. This is the bad guy jumping up after you thought he was dead and killing two more people before finally dying. There are also other variations on that as well. So after you're done with your climax or your false climax, that's where you have your falling action. I think the best falling action I ever read was probably Neil Gaiman's American Gods. I had never seen a book wrap up all of the plot threads that I didn't even know existed. And that is what you should aim to do. Tie up absolutely everything, including the things that you didn't even know were things. Usually this time where the tension is going down is a good time to examine the impact that the characters have felt. It's a good time to get their reflections on what has happened and to really show the way that things have changed. All right. You can start developing your story from any one of these points. wait, I think we have something wrong there. That's not really
Is it the
related.
word faucet?
It is in fact water system that is wrong. Faucet is right.
So will I go on to this one?
Yeah, I think so. That looks like we should have cut it out.
Okay. Okay. Let's see, so just one note, our notes are a bit messed up. The important thing is that when you start to work on your story seriously, whether you're at the start of the word vomit or in the late stages of editing, you have to have a firm grasp on where your tale is going. Audiences don't like it when they get the feeling the author doesn't know where the story is going either. Leech. And that brings us to our final section, characters. Every story is going to have them unless you do something incredibly esoteric. Characters are the medium through which your audience will experience your work and will often be the most memorable aspect of your story. To make quality characters, you must know two things about each and every one of them: their past and their ambition. The past of a character has everything that has happened to them until the moment they appear in your story. The depth of you and your audience's knowledge of a character's past will depend on their role in the story. You'll know much more about your main character's past than the ticket attendant who passes them in one scene. While it is important to know the big events, like the classics of having your peaceful home village destroyed or being orphaned, it's also important to know smaller things. Big, fantastical, traumatic events are dramatic and will leave marks on the character, but knowing about smaller parts will help. Smaller, more intimate details about them will help inform about God, speak that out. Oh, it's
That's
Thursday.
okay, Brent. It's okay. It's a Thursday.
Knowing these intimate aspects will help you make your characters, that the audience will relate to and like. More people have a favorite food than have had their hometown raised by a madman with a talking sword. At least I hope so. Also remember that the major events in their lives can affect the character in different ways. One example I like to look to is Chris Traeger from Parks and Rec. You didn't think I was going to make a Parks and Rec reference in this, did you? One big part of this backstory was that he was very ill when he was young. As a result, he is extremely health conscious and positive, treating each day like a blessing. At one point later in the series, he was anxious about having children because he was worried about passing that disease on to them. Those are three important character aspects, all stemming from one point in the backstory. Don't hesitate to step back and think about what the events of your character's past, large or small, might affect their personalities.
Additionally, every character wants something, whether they are a minor character or a major character. Everyone has an ambition. It might be something really small, or something really large. Some people want to conquer the world. Other people really just want to get tickets to go see the new Star Wars. Alright. Minor ambitions are more situational or of minor importance. A character may want to see a faraway place, but consider it more fantasy than a realistic goal. A major ambition could be called a life goal. It's something a character is willing to structure their entire identity around. Deku, My Hero Academia. He wants to be the #1 pro hero. That is his life.
And he'll eat hair to do it.
He also cleaned up the beach. Don't forget the beach. Everyone focuses on that hair. Alright. A character may desire a certain thing or goal that merely represents something they want in a deeper, more abstract way. Just how your character pursues their ambition can also tell the reader a lot about them. Now, there is a great deal more to characters than their past ambitions, but these two aspects are universal. Whether you're writing a horror story, a romance, military, science fiction, your characters have a past and an ambition. Heroes, villains, sidekicks, love interests will all have them as well. The last note to make is about the idea of character-driven and plot-driven stories. So we got a really good example for plot-driven that I think everyone will see the second we say it. Pokemon. The characters are interchangeable. It's just the quest to be the very best. That's it. There is no character
Like
drivenness.
no one ever was.
In fact, Ash trades out his companions quite frequently, and can you honestly tell the difference?
One has green hair, other ones don't.
True.
Yeah, see?
And that is about the level of care that one has in a strictly plot-driven series.
And please note, this isn't to say that character-driven or plot-driven stories are better, because everyone loves Pokemon.
Yeah.
It hasn't, the fact that it's a plot-driven story hasn't stopped anyone from really liking it. A more character-driven story that is more modern is Demon Slayer. It is driven by, the events of that show are driven by Tanjiro and Nezuko doing what they do. Their decisions matter. Sure, there's other stuff going on in the background, but...
There may be plot, but the difference is that the plot is framed through the lens of Nezuko and Tanjiro. It's about how they're dealing with all of the things going wrong in their lives. It's not about, well, I mean, it is about killing Muzan and whatnot, but that's all because of everything that has happened to them.
So, we've talked about process and story structure. Now I want to mention, and characters. Now I want to mention progress. So let's see. As we've shown off, our processes are quite different from each other. This is because, as we said a lot probably, is writing is a very personal process that takes time to learn. In 2014, I moved out of my parents' house and got a job at a credit union. I worked in an office, I wore a tie, I made tie money, I was going to write on the weekends, I had everything all planned out. They fired me in 3 months, because that's how I found out I don't do well in an office. And I got fired at the beginning of National Novel Writing Month. Now, I'm not really all one for like signs and portents, but that was pretty on the nose. Let's see. I started taking writing really seriously, and 2 years later, I had my first book out. It didn't take me 2 years to write it. It took me 2 years to learn what my process was, to learn what worked for me. Now, let's see. I learned that I needed a lot of prep time, that I couldn't work on more than one project at a time, and that I can't describe people to save my life. Yeah, Andrew has to edit all my stuff, he knows.
It's true. When I say the rule of three, it's because I have to remind him the rule of three.
He's tall, isn't that enough?
No. By the way, the rule of three is just the idea that you need 3 characteristics for people to latch onto for a character. For those of you who are underwriters, try to remember that. 3 things. If you can tell me 3 things about their appearance, people are way more likely to remember it. It also piggybacks off the idea of, the 3-act structure, which is so prevalent in Western media.
I should actually finish up there.
No. Pretty much. So as you learn how to be productive, you'll run into a lot of pitfalls. You'll find out you need to cut out your favorite scene or character because it doesn't fit in with the rest of the story anymore. You're going to find out that epic trilogy you planned only has enough material for a short novella. You're going to have bad days where you just can't get anything done, and you hate yourself. And all that's fine, so long as you just keep going. If you make an effort to learn from your trials and tribulations, you'll find each new work comes a little bit easier. Just keep going.
And before we open the floor to questions, I want to answer one that I get pretty much every time we do that. We do this panel, and it's, what do you do about writer's block? That's a question that's always on everyone's mind. So there are 3 pretty much surefire ways to beat writer's block. 1, stop. Go do something else. Go wash the dishes, sweep, go out, do some chores. Do anything that will get your mind off it, because there's a fair chance that you're just going over and over the same 2 options in your mind. Doing something with your hands will really help break you out of that loop. The second way to beat writer's block is talk to someone. Is bring your idea, bring your problem to them. They might have a perspective that you don't, and they can offer you a way out. Or if you can't do that, talk at someone. I would
like to say I'm a professional wall. I can be talked at quite easily.
So I'm very fortunate to live in a house with writers, Because I can walk into Andrew's room at like 1 o'clock in the morning and go like, God, I don't know what I'm going to do. I want them to all go to the festival together, but this big event is happening after that. Then they won't go because they all hate each other now, but I just don't know what to do. I want to have this, but I can't have this. But if I move the festival to before that, that fixes everything. Thanks.
And usually I'd said just about as much to encourage that outcome.
Yeah, sometimes I don't think he knows I'm there.
Oh, no, I do.
Okay, good. You don't really respond.
Yeah.
Let's see, and the third one, the third way to beat writer's block will come when you know your process. Because after you know how you write, what makes you write, what works for you, you'll know why you can't write something. Because when I get stuck, I get stuck on things like, oh right, I haven't planned this, that's why I can't write anything. I haven't planned out, I don't know what's going to happen, so I can't write. So once I got past that, writer's block really kind of faded away. Because I knew what was messing with me personally. Everything else I just talk it in, or do some dishes.
Sometimes both.
Yeah. Sometimes I talk at Andrew while doing dishes.
Talk to the dishes. Talk at the dishes.
You know what? Whatever works.
Great.
You know, to borrow from coding, rubber duck theory is a thing. You know, you read your code to your rubber duck, and then you find out, oh, that's where I made a mistake.
I need a rubber duck.
I think they're selling something like that in the vendor's room tomorrow. There's got to be a rubber duck in there somewhere.
Rubber duck, anything really that's cute and will distract you for 2 seconds. And then you can tell what you're doing. So you say it out loud and realize what's wrong.
We are social animals. We're meant to bring our problems to each other. That was way more philosophical than I intended it to be. I'd like to open the floor for questions now.
Because we have about 23 minutes left.
And there's usually, like I said, I like to leave plenty of room for questions. Yes, you in the back.
What advice do you have for when you're trying to get from like one plot point to another, and there's like some downtime in it, but you just have no idea what to put in there? Like, sorry, it's a confusing question, but
No.
when you have like 2 plot points, like say like 2 characters are trying to go from one place to another, but you have no idea what to write like in the middle of that. Like, what advice do you have for trying to figure out that?
This sounds like cheating, but I have a follow-up question. Does anything important happen? You could just time skip it. You don't have to write it out. Now, that might not necessarily be the most satisfying way to handle that problem, but I want you to know that it is on the table. You could do that. If nothing important happens, there's no reason you can't fade to black and pick back up later. Additionally, you could ask yourself, okay, what cool things could happen? When I'm really, really stuck trying to make an outline, because again, I am not a planner by nature, I sometimes just write down, like on note cards, a list of ideas, and then I'll shuffle them around until it looks cool.
Anything that happens needs to advance the story. It doesn't necessarily have to be the main plot. If
Or
you have
character.
like,
It can advance character too.
yeah, if you have a time skip where, oh, these characters are going to be on a boat for a week, I could just skip it, like, or I could have this. Why am I ringing?
I don't know why you're ringing.
Yeah. All right. Or you could have all right. Character A is going to teach character B how to fish. That'll be amusing. The audience will probably like it, and it'll advance their relationship a little bit later on.
Yeah, in a moment where you have downtime that you're certain that you want to use, but you don't have a good idea for yet, it's a good idea to look at which characters haven't received a lot of limelight and see who you can put the spotlight on. That's a thing that I sometimes do after I'm done drafting. I'll go back through and see if there were characters that maybe only had a little bit of screen time and I should probably use them more. I hope some of that helps.
Another question?
So when you're writing like a fantasy world or something, what's like a good way to introduce parts of it to the audience without being very like forceful or obvious and like pushy?
I write for World Building Magazine. You've asked the right person. So the key to introducing a fantasy world is do it slowly. info dumps can be useful, but you'll want to introduce your world as it is important to your characters. Like, say, for example, hey, there's a dragon that lives over on that mountain. Now, you don't want to just like be in the middle of a scene about, gardening, and then someone says, by the way, let me tell you the 300-year-old history of this dragon that lives over here.
Here are the 18 types of braggarts.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. But when they're on the mountain and suddenly, oh, there's an earthquake and there's a lot of fire going on, knowing about that dragon is suddenly very relevant to the character and the story. So introduce the world as it is relevant, as it relates to the characters right then, and that'll help keep the audience engaged.
How do you figure out, like, there was a planner, and then there was...
Pantser.
Yeah, I'm that. How do you figure out how you want to end the story?
That's why I usually start with the ending in mind personally. If I didn't have an ending in mind, that would be kind of difficult for me to figure out how to get there. I would struggle to work from the beginning. I think I've looked at things that I really enjoyed and asked, like, what about this ending did I enjoy, and what about that could I transfer over? Like, what are the types of endings you enjoy?
There's, what's that book by Neil Gaiman, Neverwhere? Have you read
Neverwhere.
that one? I love
It's a good
that
one.
book. I feel like there are a lot of characters that are interesting, but I feel like the main point of that story is you're just following the main, who's pretty much a nothing character. You can disagree with that, but I think he's just...
No, I think that's explicitly the point.
I think the point is we're following this nothing character through the world. I think the point of that story is the world more than anything.
That's definitely a way to write. And if you have, and this happens with pantsers a lot, it's you have like all this stuff and you don't know what to do with it. The advice I give you is talk to some people about it. Ask, hey, I have these ideas, which one sounds the most interesting? That one? Okay, talk to someone else. Talk to some people, and if your intent is to like get this written and published so people can see it, then and maybe give you money, which is
Big
nice.
maybe.
I'm writing for me, honestly.
Yeah, well then, do whatever feels best. Like whatever of those bits you have there, whatever makes you the happiest, write it. If, the two main characters go off and start an ice cream stand and everything's like happy fun, write that.
Okay, that's my ending, thank you.
We're asking the important questions here. Yes, you.
Relevant to that, which is how do you find people to share your stories with if you don't happen to live in a house full of writers?
Discord, yeah.
Discord.
I'm on Twitter, and I've met like 3 or 4 different people who I now beta read for and who beta read for me. It's really just social media can work for that, but you gotta be a little selective on it. But put a feeler out there. If you see somebody that you get online and you're talking to, that can pan out.
Look for people who are doing something called a draft trade, which is I'll read your thing, you read my thing. And then that's nice and neutral. You're not asking a stranger like, hi, I have 40,000 words, tell me if it's good. Which no one wants to do. No one wants to be on either side of that. But it's like, hey, read my thing, I'll read your thing.
That's 40,000. I put like 75 in.
Oh, that's okay. That's perfectly normal.
Hey, someone who might have an 80,000 word thing that they don't think anyone's going to want to read.
Yeah.
You gotta...
And you know what? Some people also do chapter trades before they sign up for doing a longer thing. Because if you read somebody's, someone writes a Harlequin romance, I'm not personally interested in that. Would I read it for them as a favor if I knew them personally? Absolutely, but I probably wouldn't sign up for it without a draft trade, because that's more effort than I would want to put into something that is probably perfectly fine, but just not my cup of tea. You can have a preference without being mean about it. So yeah, look for chapter trades, draft trades, just make connections online mostly. So long as you're willing to do a service for somebody else, people are usually willing to do the same back.
And you had a question.
Yeah, going back to what she said about info dumping or cutting what's relevant. What if your story focused on a non-human character as opposed to a human character? Would that change anything?
Okay.
Yes, and what?
I got a little bit on.
Oh, go for it. Yeah.
So my first thought is that when you're dealing with non-human characters, especially as a focal point, you're unfortunately gonna have to dump a little bit of info, but the info you dump has to be important to the character. It's not necessarily the things that a human reader is going to necessarily immediately be like, okay, I get why we're doing this, but it has to be meaningful to the character. Doing it that way will help get us invested. We don't need to know, like if your main character's a Dragonborn borrowing from D&D, because I'm spitballing here. You don't have to know every intimate detail, but you might want to know about their family structure because they're living it. So long as it's relevant to the character, you're going to have an easier time. And unfortunately though, because of the nature of a non-human viewpoint, you're probably going to have to info dump a little bit harder. It's definitely going to be a thing that you'll revise a lot. Because there is a very fine line to walk on that between too much and not nearly enough. But if you can always ask that question of, does it matter to the character? And why should this matter to the audience? If you can answer those ones successfully, then it's good info.
And when you're starting out, focus on the familiar, right? When you introduce your character, what do they do that is something a human would do? Do they eat? Do they sleep? Start with something the audience knows, and then build on like, oh yeah, he ate his breakfast, and then he cleaned all his 400 teeth. It's like, oh, okay, this guy's eating, but he has
Ritual
400
sacrifice,
teeth. Yeah, just focus on the familiar. Start with the familiar, and then build out from there. And then eventually they'll get like, okay, this guy, is whatever he is. But focus on, unless you're like writing an Eldritch Abomination, then good luck. I can't get through Lovecraft. Did you with a blue mask have a question?
Yeah, so as somebody who kind of waffles between a planner and a pantser, when I just word vomit, I'm maybe starting in the middle of a story and it's coming out working out well, but sometimes the stories that I care the most about, that I'm like, I've been planning, I'll have like a full notebook full of a complete timeline and post-it notes all over it, and I will literally plan myself out of writing.
That makes sense, because at your heart it sounds like you're more of a pantser, and that's fine. And there is something to be gained by having an outline, by having all that information, but I think you just nailed it right on the head. You're taking away the fun part from yourself. You're getting enjoyment out of creating, not out of planning. So I do think you should plan, but maybe cut back on it. Like, make it really a loose outline. Something that you can reference rather than go read your note that you're already bored of because you don't have any flexibility with it. That would be my advice. Cut back, but still have a little bit of a guiding path.
And keep it, give keeping it broad a try. Like, okay, so for this story, my character's going to go to this lovely ice cream stand that just opened up. And let's see, on the way, they're going to get a flat tire, then let's just see what happens. And then maybe that'll work well for you.
You don't have to have all the answers. Your plan can be very loose. You can have even just a few things that you want to hit on, and then fill in the blanks the fun way, or the way that is fun for you, I should say.
Seems like, for whatever reason, whatever I start with avalanches into continuing to do it, and then if I accidentally start with planning, I might never get there.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a question. What's the longest thing you've written that's like you've considered finished, like completed?
Like 50,000.
50,000?
That's pretty good,
yeah,
actually.
that's doing pretty good.
That's a very good start.
The first thing I finished is this. It's 30,000. So you're moving along better. You're moving along pretty well. Are you going for like that big like door stopper size thing, or do you like?
No, I just want to enjoy the story.
Want to enjoy the story. So just again, do what makes you happy, and keep tweaking the process. Eventually, you'll find something that will click. Yes, you were the horns, because I love calling on people at anime conventions. President Loki.
As a pantser, I kind of struggle with being organized. I was just kind of wondering how you can like write that transition, like character progression, without like being too blunt about it. I don't know if that makes sense. You know how the character changes from the beginning to the end of the story. I guess how do you kind of write that character progression?
I'm in the middle of that right now. I'm in the middle of learning that right now with the story I've been writing for a year and a half. And I walked into it not realizing that since I'm a planner, I need to exclusively plan out character development. Because most of the long form stories I've told have been D&D games, and these guys take care of the character development for me. So I'm figuring that out myself right now, and I found out that I needed to have like milestones. It's like, okay, in this scene they have to have an epiphany. And they're gonna have one, I don't care how much I have to stomp on their heart.
For every chapter, have little milestones.
I have found that's what I have to do to make that work. Andrew, do you have anything to say about that?
I, as someone who's more on a Pantser scale, have no idea how you do that. I respect you, but I have no idea how you do that. That's a tough one. Accounting for how a character changes is never easy. It might be a good idea to, I tentatively like the idea that he's putting forward of distinctly, select where it's happening, but I definitely don't think I would say every chapter. Definitely feels like changes like that to me feel like they should be more spread out. After big events, I, in my own personal experiences, found that people really only change after something big happens. So I would write them partially static until they hit the moment where it's real, and where there is no other choice but to become different than who they are, or who they were.
And then what I have in my outline is notes and how that is displayed. Like, okay, so this character no longer cares about this anymore. And they're gonna speak, their sentences are gonna be much shorter, gonna be much terser. To kind of show how they're taking this a lot more seriously now, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Again, that works for me. Take some of the ice we've had here, experiment, figure out what works for you. Android 17?
Yes.
Hey.
What do you do to help keep motivation up? Because sometimes I'll go through peaks and valleys where it's like I'm writing like a madman, and then I can't look at a book to sit and I can't look at a book to save my life. How do you balance being able to stay consistent with your motivation and keeping writing?
You have to forgive yourself when you lose motivation. You're gonna have those times where I was supposed to have 12,000 words written by now, and then my whole plans changed. I wanted to be done with this section of the book, and then on to the next one, a clean start for summer, and then I had to do other things, and that happens. There are times when I have a really hard day at work, and I was like, I was gonna write when I get home, but no, I'm gonna get Burger King and try to find something terrible to watch on Netflix.
Another thing to note is set yourself a really, really low goal. Something that you can achieve even on your worst day. Currently, because the world is crazy and COVID and all that, my day job keeps me way too busy and I am exhausted by the end of it. I did 6 months straight of doing 6 days with overtime. During that time period, I set my daily goal to 200 words. 200 words is nothing. It is not enough, it is a drip. And I was happy with that because that is fine. Anything you do is fine. Just doing something, even if it's just 2 sentences of planning, is perfectly acceptable and a good way to just push a little bit. And what I have found is that days where I do something, I usually do more than what I've asked of myself.
And one moment, then I'll get to you. Deadlines are not sacred.
Oh yeah, we miss deadlines all the time.
Yeah, I have been writing for probably a little bit, 8 years now. I have not hit a single deadline I have set for myself in that time, but I have finished 4 books. So forgive yourself and be happy that there is progress.
Thank you.
I just kind of want to add on to it. When I feel particularly uninspired, I read something, or I listen to an audiobook, or I go and read sometimes the worst fan fiction I can find, like Obi-Wan Kenobi and General Grievous is my favorite so far.
Sometimes spite is inspiring.
Yeah, I find other stories, even if they're not great, really inspiring.
This crap got published, I can do this.
Exactly.
I mean, honest to God, that's one thing that sometimes motivates me is spite.
I find a lot of inspiration from Lord of the Rings because there are some. Lord of the Rings is wonderful, but there are some sentences in that where you can kind of forgive yourself because the sentence is like, the food was good. And it's like, oh, that's such a simple sentence, and it's in like one of the most famous pieces of literature. I can just say simple things like that too.
But yeah, if things don't go to plan, if you don't get as much done as you wanted to, if things don't work out, forgive yourself. Learn. Just keep going. The book I'm writing right now, which is tentatively titled Yusha Pirates, I was supposed to have been done writing in 1 year. I'm almost at 2 years, and I'm about halfway done. But there's more of it now than there was when I started. And I've learned a lot about how I can write big stories, mostly that I shouldn't do it. But that's part of the process. Fail, learn, keep going.
Fail forward is the phrase.
Yes, fail forward.
All right, we gotta check time because we're supposed to be done at 6:30. We have 3 more minutes. Anyone else have anything pressing?
Yes, you in the back.
Also to add on to that, something I like to do when I don't really know if my story is coming out well or not, I watch like kind of in-depth like criticism videos on popular books and media so I can figure out what not to do. Like with a lot of stuff where like, oh, don't over-explain this like thing in like a character plot or backstory. Don't have something just be totally just like appear and then never be brought up again. And I also like reading the worst things I've ever read in my life. It makes me feel a lot better about it, right? And so I like to at least, cause I have a hard time complimenting myself, so I feel at least it's like better than, at least like okay. Like,
Yeah.
if I can't bring myself to say it's great, I'll just say like it's better than that.
Yeah, and again, that's
entirely valid.
Yep, that works. So before everyone goes, we'll be hosting another panel on Sunday at 10 a.m. Quest hubs and dungeon crawls. It's all going to be about how to build a good setting for a D&D campaign. And has anyone here been to my Foundations of World Building panel? Oh god, that's such an ego boost. We're going to be building
It's a really good panel, and I'm sad that it's not here this year.
Yeah. We're going to be building a Quest hub setting as we go along in that one. So if you liked, and was anyone here for, let's see, so yeah, so we'll be building it like we've done in Foundations of World Building before. So if you like that, you'll probably like what we're putting together for Sunday. All right, thanks for coming, everyone.
All right, it's been a pleasure. You can find us in the dealer's room starting tomorrow.
Yep.